Welcome back. This channel exists because of your support. Subscribe, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now let's get into the story. Looking back now, I realized the red flags were all there when Jessica suddenly announced she wanted to celebrate her 31st birthday at Burn's Steakhouse on South Howard Avenue. My wife of 3 years never cared for fancy restaurants. Always said they were overpriced and pretentious, that we could get better steaks at home for half the price. But there she was, wearing her best black dress and heels I'd only seen her wear twice before, practically bouncing with excitement as we walked through the dimly lit entrance of Tampa's most expensive steakhouse. The hostess led us through the main dining room, past tables of well-dressed couples and business executives, to a corner table that Jessica had specifically requested. The table was set for 6 with crisp white linens and polished silverware that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Her usual crew was already there. They'd obviously arrived early to set up whatever they had planned. Amber Mitchell sat there with her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer purse, always the one orchestrating everyone else's business like she was running some kind of relationship consulting firm. Rachel Torres was next to her, gesturing wildly with her wine glass as she told some animated story, clearly having ordered a drink while waiting for us to arrive. Lindsay Parker looked nervous, fidgeting with her cloth napkin like she always did when the group was planning something she wasn't entirely comfortable with. And Nicole Rivera sat back with that knowing smirk she always wore, like she had inside information about everyone's secrets, ready to watch whatever show was about to unfold. The atmosphere felt different from our usual birthday celebrations. There was an undercurrent of anticipation, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. The way they kept glancing at each other with meaningful looks, the way conversation seemed forced and overly cheerful. If I'd been paying closer attention, I might have picked up on the signs earlier. "Happy birthday, babe," I said, giving Jess a kiss on the cheek as I pulled out her chair. The leather was soft and expensive, the kind of chair that whispered money with every movement. "Thank you, honey," she said, but her voice had a strange quality to it, like she was reading lines from a script she'd rehearsed. The waiter, dressed in a crisp white shirt and black vest, took our drink orders with the kind of professional courtesy that comes with decades of serving Tampa's elite. I ordered my usual beer, a local IPA that I'd grown fond of since moving to Florida. Jessica asked for wine, something French and expensive that I'd never heard her order before. "So, Mike," Amber said, leaning forward with that predatory smile she always wore when she was about to give unsolicited advice. "How are things with work? Jessica says you've been putting in long hours lately." "Same as always," I replied, already sensing this wasn't casual small talk. "End of quarter reports, you know how it is." "That must be hard on the relationship," Rachel chimed in, her voice dripping with fake concern. "All that time apart, all that stress. Some couples have trouble maintaining intimacy when work becomes such a priority." I looked at Jessica, who was staring at her wine glass like it contained the secrets of the universe. "We're doing fine. Work is work, but we always make time for each other." "Do you, though?" Nicole asked, her tone sharp with implied criticism. "I mean, when was the last time you two went on a real date? Something spontaneous and romantic?" The questions kept coming, each one designed to create doubt and tension. Lindsay mostly stayed quiet, but I could see her shooting worried glances at Jessica, like she knew what was coming and wasn't comfortable with it. The appetizers arrived, perfectly plated and artistically arranged, but the mood at the table had shifted. What should have been a celebration was starting to feel like an interrogation. The women had ordered an impressive spread: Amber's lobster tail, Rachel's salmon, Lindsay's chicken, and Nicole's pasta, while they continued their pointed questions designed to highlight supposed problems in our relationship that I'd never noticed before. About halfway through the main course, I was cutting into my perfectly cooked ribeye when Jessica suddenly put down her fork with enough force to make it clink against the bone china plate. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence that fell over our table. These women were never quiet, especially not Rachel, who could talk for hours about anything, which should have been my first warning. "Mike, I think we need to talk about something important," she said, her voice carrying across the restaurant louder than necessary. Other diners were starting to look our way. "I've been thinking about our relationship, and I don't think this is working anymore. I'm not happy." I looked up from my steak, genuinely confused. We'd been talking about renovating our kitchen, maybe starting a family soon. What are you talking about, Jess? We just picked out new appliances for the house last weekend. That's exactly the problem, she said, and I could see her friends nodding encouragingly. We're just going through the motions. There's no passion anymore. I want to get divorced. The word hung in the air awkwardly. I could see the waiter hovering nearby, clearly uncomfortable. I just don't feel fulfilled in this relationship anymore. Jessica continued, getting louder. I need space to find myself. The restaurant's main dining area was staring at me now. Her friends were leaning forward like they were watching their favorite show, waiting for the emotional fireworks they'd clearly expected. I set down my knife and fork, took a slow sip of my beer, and really looked at her. This woman I'd been married to for 3 years was sitting there with this expectant expression, like she was waiting for me to fall apart. Okay, I said simply. Jessica stared at me, eyes wide with shock. Okay, she repeated, voice rising. That's it. Just okay? You're not going to fight for our marriage? I pulled out my wallet and carefully counted out $60, placing the bills on the table next to my half-finished steak with deliberate precision. The money covered my portion of the meal plus a generous tip for our waiter, who didn't deserve to be stiffed just because my wife had decided to turn his workplace into a theater. If you want a divorce, we'll get a divorce, I said, my voice steady and professional, the same tone I used in difficult business meetings. I'm not going to sit here and argue about it in front of a restaurant full of strangers. I stood up slowly, straightened my jacket, and took a moment to look around the table at her friends. Their faces were a study in shock and confusion, like they'd just watched a magic trick where the rabbit disappeared, but the magician forgot to make it reappear. Amber's mouth was literally hanging open, her fork suspended in midair with a piece of lobster still attached from her barely touched dinner. Rachel looked like someone had just told her that her favorite reality show had been canceled, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. Lindsay had gone pale and was gripping her water glass so tightly I was worried it might shatter. Nicole's smirk had vanished completely, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. Ladies, I said with a polite nod, enjoy the rest of your evening. The food here really is excellent when you're not too distracted by drama to taste it. I turned to Jessica, who was staring at me like I'd just transformed into a completely different person. Jess, I'll contact a lawyer this week to start the divorce proceedings. Since we bought the house together, we'll need to figure out the property division. I'll stay at my brother's place while we sort things out. Mike, wait, she started, but I was already turning away. Happy birthday, I added, and I meant it sincerely, despite everything. I hope you get exactly what you're looking for. I walked through the restaurant with measured steps, past tables of curious diners who quickly looked away when they realized I'd noticed their staring. The maitre d' at the front desk gave me a sympathetic nod, probably having witnessed similar scenes more often than anyone would care to admit in a place that hosted so many business dinners and relationship milestones. The valet brought my truck around quickly, and I tipped him well before driving away from Burns Steakhouse, leaving behind the sound of heated whispers and Jessica's voice calling my name with increasing desperation. In my rearview mirror, I could see her standing in the restaurant's entrance, her friends clustered around her like a support group for failed manipulators. The drive home took me through downtown Tampa and across the Howard Franklin Bridge, the city lights reflecting off the water in patterns that seemed more peaceful than they had in months. My phone was silent for the first 20 minutes, probably because Jessica was still at the restaurant with her friends. But once I reached my neighborhood, it started buzzing with calls and texts I had no intention of answering. When I got home, I poured myself a proper drink and sat in my recliner. The phone calls and texts continued throughout the evening from Jessica, but I didn't answer any of them. If she wanted to play games, she'd picked the wrong person to play them with. I'd always believed that when someone tells you who they are, you should listen. Tonight, Jessica told me exactly who she was, and I heard her loud and clear. The next morning came with 23 missed calls and 47 text messages. I deleted them all without reading a single one and started looking for my own apartment. My brother offered his couch until I found something, which worked perfectly since I'd need a few weeks to find the right place. By the time I got to work, Jessica was already calling again. I let it go to voicemail and focused on the quarterly reports that needed my attention. Around 10 in the morning, while I was reviewing quarterly sales figures in my corner office on the 15th floor of the downtown Tampa high-rise where I worked, My assistant knocked on my door with an expression I'd never seen before. Margaret had been with the company for 12 years and had seen every kind of workplace drama imaginable, but she looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Your girlfriend is here," she said, keeping her voice low even though my door was closed. "She's in the lobby, and she seems pretty upset. Security called up because she's been asking to see you for the last 20 minutes, and her voice is carrying throughout the entire ground floor." I could hear Jessica's voice echoing up from the lobby, even through the elevator shaft, which was 15 floors down and separated by multiple layers of steel and concrete. The building had excellent soundproofing, which meant she was making quite a scene down there. "Send her up," I said with a sigh, then added, "And Margaret? Hold all my calls for the next 20 minutes. Also, if this gets loud, you might want to close your door. I don't want this affecting anyone else's work." Margaret nodded with the understanding of someone who'd seen enough office drama to write a book about it. "Should I call security as a precaution? Let's see how it goes. If I need them, I'll let you know." Within 5 minutes, I could hear Jessica's heels clicking down the hallway with the rapid staccato rhythm of someone who was either very late for something or very angry about something. The clicking got faster as she approached my door, like a countdown timer accelerating towards 0. She burst through my office door without knocking, which was a first in our 3-year relationship. Jessica had always been respectful of my professional space, understanding that my work environment required a certain level of decorum and mutual respect. But this woman looked like someone I'd never met before. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, with mascara streaked down her cheeks in uneven lines. She was still wearing the same black dress from the night before, now wrinkled and stained with what looked like wine or coffee. Her hair, which had been perfectly styled for dinner at Burns, now looked like she'd been running her fingers through it compulsively for hours. "We need to talk," she said, crossing her arms defensively and planting herself in front of my desk like she was claiming territory. "You can't just walk away from our relationship like that. 3 years doesn't just disappear because of one conversation." I leaned back in my leather office chair and studied her carefully, using the same analytical approach I brought to difficult client negotiations. The woman standing in my office bore little resemblance to the confident, composed person who had announced our breakup less than 18 hours earlier. "Yesterday you said you wanted to break up," I said, keeping my voice level and professional, the same tone I used when delivering bad news to clients. "Today you're upset because I agreed to break up. I'm having trouble understanding the logic here, Jess. It wasn't supposed to go like that." The words exploded out of her like she'd been holding them in under pressure all night. "You were supposed to fight for us, to show me that you cared enough to try, to prove that our relationship meant something to you. So this was a test." I kept my voice level and professional. "You decided to humiliate me in public to see how I'd react." Jessica's face flushed. "The girls said that sometimes men need a wake-up call. They said if you truly loved me, you'd fight to keep me." "The girls," I repeated the words slowly. So Amber, Rachel, Lindsay, and Nicole all knew about this little performance. "They were just trying to help," she said defensively. "They've seen how distant we've become." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where I could see her car parked crooked across 2 spaces. "Jess, in 3 years together, when have I ever given you reason to doubt my commitment? When have I ever played games or tested you? That's not the point." "That's exactly the point." I turned to face her. "You and your friends decided to treat our relationship like some kind of social experiment. You announced you wanted to break up in front of a restaurant full of strangers, and now you're surprised that I took you seriously." She started crying again, those tears that used to make me want to fix whatever was wrong. Today, they just made me tired. "Please," she said, reaching for my hand. "It was a mistake. I love you. We can forget this happened and move on." I pulled my hand away gently but firmly. "No, we can't. Because now I know that when things get tough, instead of talking to me, you'll run to your friends and cook up some scheme. I know that you think our relationship is entertainment for other people." "I already found an apartment," I continued. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but we're broken up. You asked for it, and I'm giving you what you asked for." Jessica stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. "You're being cruel." "I'm being honest. There's a difference." I walked back to my desk and picked up the phone. "I have work to do. You can get your things this weekend when I'm not there." She stood there for another minute, maybe hoping I'd change my mind or break down and beg her to stay. When I started dialing, she finally left, slamming the door behind her hard enough to rattle the frame. For the first time in months, my mind felt clear. When someone shows you their authentic self, the smart play is to believe them. 2 months into living separately, I was having lunch at this deli near my office when I spotted Amber sitting alone in a corner booth, staring at her phone with tears streaming down her face. This was the same woman who'd been grinning like a cat at Jessica's birthday dinner, watching my relationship implode for her entertainment. I paid for my sandwich and was heading for the door when she looked up and saw me. Her eyes went wide, and she quickly tried to wipe away the tears. "Oh," she said, her voice shaky. "Hi." I could have kept walking. Should have, probably. But curiosity got the better of me. "Rough day?" I asked, stopping by her table. Amber let out a bitter laugh. "You could say that. Kevin moved out yesterday." Kevin was her boyfriend of 2 years, a decent guy who worked construction and coached Little League on weekends. I'd met him a few times and always thought he seemed like good people. "Sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. "He found out about the whole birthday thing," she continued, apparently needing to talk to someone. "Jessica told Rachel, who told Lindsay, who told me that you actually went through with the divorce." Kevin was furious when I mentioned it. "Mentioned it how?" Amber's face crumpled. "I was complaining about how you didn't fight for Jessica like we thought you would." Kevin just stared at me and asked if I was serious. Then he wanted to know whose idea the whole thing was. I sat down across from her, genuinely interested now. "And you told him?" "I had to." He kept asking questions, getting angrier and angrier. He said he couldn't believe I would help sabotage someone's relationship for entertainment. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. He said he didn't recognize the person he was dating. The irony wasn't lost on me. Kevin had discovered something about Amber's character that made him question their entire relationship, just like I had with Jessica. "He called me manipulative," Amber whispered. "Said I was toxic and that he wondered what other schemes I'd been part of that he didn't know about." I took a bite of my sandwich, letting her continue. "The worst part is, he's right. When Jessica came up with the idea, it seemed harmless. Like we were helping her figure out if you truly cared. But Kevin made me see how horrible it actually was." She wiped her nose with a napkin. "He said any woman who would do that to a friend's relationship wasn't someone he could trust. So he left, packed his bags, and went to stay with his brother. Said he needed time to think about whether our relationship was worth saving." Amber laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "Turns out testing someone's relationship might end up costing you your own." I finished my sandwich in silence, watching this woman who'd helped orchestrate the destruction of my relationship now dealing with the consequences of her actions. Part of me felt bad for her, but a bigger part recognized this as simple cause and effect. "For what it's worth," Amber said quietly, "I think Jessica made a huge mistake. Kevin's right about you. You're one of the good ones." I stood up and gathered my trash. "The thing about trust, Amber, is that once it's broken, it's almost impossible to rebuild. Jessica broke mine, and apparently you broke Kevin's." I left her sitting there, probably wondering how a birthday dinner 2 months ago had led to this moment. As I walked back to the office, I couldn't help but think that the dominoes were starting to fall exactly the way they should. 3 weeks later, I was leaving the gym when I ran into Rachel at the parking garage. She was crying too, which seemed to be a theme with Jessica's friends lately. "Hey," she said, jogging to catch up with me. "Got a minute?" I could tell from her expression this wasn't going to be casual small talk. We leaned against my truck, and Rachel ran her hands through her hair like she'd been doing it all day. "Brian broke up with me," she said without preamble. "Called off our engagement last week." Brian was a good guy, an engineer who'd seemed genuinely happy with Rachel. They'd been engaged for 8 months, planning a wedding for next spring. "What happened?" "He found out about Jessica's birthday dinner. The whole fake divorce thing." Rachel's voice was tight with emotion. "But not just that he found out. He found out how I told the story." "How did you tell it?" "At his family barbecue last weekend. I thought it was funny, you know? This crazy thing that happened. His parents and siblings were horrified." She started crying harder. "They asked what kind of person thinks destroying someone's relationship is entertaining." I waited for her to continue, watching her struggle with whatever she needed to say. "Brian said he'd been noticing things about me for a while. How I always seemed to enjoy drama and conflict. How I'd stir things up and then act like I was just trying to help." She looked up at me. "He said I treated other people's pain like a TV show." And you disagreed? I tried to explain that we were helping Jessica, that we were good friends looking out for each other. But Brian asked me directly, "Do you think what happened to Mike was funny?" And honestly, part of me still did think it was kind of amusing. The complete lack of empathy was stunning, even knowing what I knew about Rachel. So he ended it. Said he couldn't marry someone who got entertainment from hurting people. Said he'd been questioning my character for months, and this confirmed everything he was worried about. She wiped her nose with her sleeve. His whole family supports his decision. They think he dodged a bullet. As she walked away, I realized that each of Jessica's friends was discovering that their worldview had consequences they hadn't anticipated. Another month passed before I ran into Lindsay. She was at the grocery store, looking lost in the cereal aisle, staring at boxes like they held the secrets of the universe. "Lindsay," I said, and she jumped like I'd fired a gun. "Oh, Mike. Hi." She was clearly flustered, dropping the cereal box she'd been holding. "I didn't expect to see you here. You okay? You seem a little scattered." "Stephen broke up with me 2 weeks ago," she said, then immediately looked like she regretted sharing that information. Stephen was a nice guy, an accountant who'd seemed to genuinely care about Lindsay despite her obvious insecurities. They'd been dating for over a year. "I'm sorry to hear that." He said, "I don't have any boundaries." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them in. Said I tell everyone everything about our relationship, and he felt like he was dating my entire friend group instead of just me. That actually made a lot of sense. Lindsay had always been the type to seek approval from everyone around her, never making a decision without consulting the group. He also said he couldn't trust me with anything private because I'd just share it with whoever I was trying to impress at the moment. She picked up the cereal box again, clutching it like a lifeline. "The worst part is, he's right. I don't know how to keep anything to myself." "Did you tell him about Jessica's birthday?" "I told him everything. About how we planned it. About how we expected you to react. About how shocked we were when you just agreed and left. I thought he'd think it was interesting." She shook her head. Instead, he asked me why I'd go along with something like that. And I couldn't answer him because I didn't really know. I just did it because everyone else was doing it. Stephen said he needed someone who could think for herself, someone with her own opinions and values. He said I was like a chameleon, changing colors depending on who I was around. Lindsay started tearing up. He's not wrong. I don't even know who I am when I'm alone. I watched her struggle with this realization, this woman who'd never learned to exist independently of group validation. He said the birthday dinner thing was just a symptom of a bigger problem, that I'd sacrifice anyone's happiness to avoid conflict with my friends. She looked at me directly for the first time. "I'm sorry, Mike. I knew it was wrong, but I was too scared to speak up." "I appreciate that," I said, and meant it. Of all Jessica's friends, Lindsay seemed the most capable of actual growth. "All my friends are gone now," she said quietly. "Amber's bitter about Kevin. Rachel's angry about Brian. Nicole's dealing with her own problems. And Jessica won't talk to any of us." As I left the store, I couldn't help but think that maybe being alone would be the best thing that could happen to Lindsay. Maybe she'd finally figure out who she was without a committee telling her. The final domino fell a month later when I ran into Andrew at a coffee shop downtown. He was Nicole's husband of about a year, and he looked exhausted. "Mike," he said, approaching my table hesitantly. "Mind if I sit?" "Sure." Andrew sat down heavily and rubbed his face. "I wanted to apologize for my wife's behavior these past few months. I had no idea how she'd been acting until recently." "What do you mean?" "The whole Jessica situation. Nicole's been treating it like entertainment, laughing about how all these relationships are falling apart." His voice was tired, defeated. "She actually made a scoreboard, ranking whose breakup was the most dramatic." I stared at him. "Seriously?" "Dead serious." When I confronted her about it, she said she was just having fun with a crazy situation. Said it wasn't her fault, that everyone else was being overdramatic. Andrew shook his head. But then I started noticing other things. How she gossips about everyone we know, how she seems to enjoy other people's problems, how she rates our friends' relationships like they're reality TV shows. That must have been hard to realize. The final straw was last week. Nicole was on the phone with someone, laughing about how Jessica is all alone now because her friends abandoned her. She said Jessica got what she deserved for listening to bad advice. Andrew looked up at me. That's when I realized I'd married someone who has no empathy. Someone who sees other people's pain as her personal entertainment. "What are you going to do?" I suggested counseling. She refused, said she's not the problem, that everyone else is just too sensitive. He stood up, looking older than his 34 years. I'm staying with my brother while I figure out what comes next. I can't be married to someone who finds joy in other people's misery. As Andrew walked away, I realized that Jessica's birthday dinner had become a character test for everyone involved. And most of them had failed. 6 months after that birthday dinner, Jessica showed up at my new apartment. I could see her through the window, sitting in her car for almost 10 minutes, probably gathering courage for whatever she'd come to say. When she finally knocked, I took my time answering. This was my space now, and I'd handle this conversation on my terms. "Hi," she said when I opened the door. She looked tired, older somehow. "Can we talk?" I let her in, noticing how she looked around my temporary apartment like she was seeing it for the first time. After I moved out of our house, I'd slowly furnished this rental with pieces that actually reflected my taste. A new couch I'd picked out myself, different artwork that meant something to me, a coffee table I'd bought rather than inherited. Small changes that probably felt huge to her, given that our house still had all the furniture we'd chosen together. "Coffee?" I asked. "Sure," Jessica replied, settling uncomfortably on the edge of my new couch. As I made coffee, I could feel her watching me, probably looking for signs that I missed her or regretted my decision. She was going to be disappointed. When the coffee was ready, she got up and joined me in the kitchen area, leaning against the counter. "So," I said, sliding a mug across the counter to her. "What's on your mind?" Jessica wrapped her hands around the mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth. "Everything's fallen apart," she said finally. "All my friends are gone. Amber and Kevin broke up. Rachel and Brian's engagement is over. Lindsay and Stephen are done. Even Nicole and Andrew are separated." I sipped my coffee and waited for her to continue. "I found out through social media and mutual friends," she explained, noticing my questioning look. "When you're suddenly cut off from your friend group, people love sharing drama, especially when they think you deserve it. And it's all because of that stupid birthday dinner." Her voice cracked slightly. "Because I listened to them instead of trusting what we had." "What changed your mind? What made you realize they were wrong?" "Living without you," she said simply. "These past 6 months have been the loneliest of my life. Not just because you weren't there, but because I realized the friends I thought I could count on were more interested in drama than actually supporting me." Jessica set down her coffee mug and looked directly at me. "After everything fell apart, they all turned on each other. Amber blamed Rachel for encouraging her. Rachel blamed me for not appreciating good advice. Lindsay blamed everyone for peer pressuring her. Nicole blamed all of us for being too dramatic. And what did you learn from all this? That I had something real with you, and I threw it away because my friends convinced me it wasn't exciting enough." She started crying, those quiet tears that used to break my heart. Today, they just made me sad for what we'd lost. I also learned that the kind of love they were talking about isn't love at all. It's possession. It's ego. It's thinking that your partner exists to perform for you rather than to build something with you. I nodded, impressed despite myself. "That's a pretty mature way to look at it." "Too mature, too late," Jessica said with a bitter laugh. "I know you've moved on. I can see it in your eyes, in this apartment, in the way you're looking at me." "I moved on the night you asked for a divorce," I said gently. When someone tells me they don't want to be married to me anymore, I believe them, even if they didn't mean it. Especially then, because that means they're willing to gamble with something precious just to see what happens. Jessica nodded slowly, tears flowing freely now. "I know. I understand. I just had to try, you know? I had to see if there was any chance." "There isn't," I said, not unkindly but firmly. "What we had is gone. It died that night at the restaurant, killed by people who thought relationships were games and consequences didn't matter." "I'm moving to Orlando," she said, attempting to compose herself. "Got a job offer there. Fresh start, you know? That sounds like a good plan." "Will you hate me forever?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I considered the question carefully. "I don't hate you, Jessica. I'm disappointed in the choices you made, and I'm angry about the way it all happened. But I don't hate you. You're not a bad person. You just trusted the wrong people and made a terrible mistake. A mistake that cost me everything. A mistake that showed me who you really are when the pressure's on. And unfortunately, that person isn't someone I can trust with my heart." Jessica stood up and picked up her purse. "I wrote letters to all of them," she said. Told them exactly what I thought about their help and how it destroyed my life. How did they take it? Amber cried and apologized. Said she never meant for it to go so far. Rachel got defensive and said I was blaming my friends for my own choices. Lindsay apologized, but said she was just following everyone else. Jessica smiled grimly. And Nicole told me I was ungrateful and that I deserved to be alone if I couldn't appreciate good advice. Sounds about right for each of them. The last thing Nicole said to me was that she hoped I'd learn my lesson about trusting weak men who don't know how to fight for what they want. Jessica looked me in the eye. But I did learn a lesson, just not the one she intended. I learned that the strongest thing a person can do is walk away from someone who doesn't value them. That fighting for someone who's testing you isn't love, it's desperation. I walked her to the door, and she paused on the threshold. For what it's worth, she said, you were the best husband I probably could have had. I'm sorry I realized it too late. Take care of yourself, Jessica, I said. I genuinely hope you find what you're looking for. She nodded and walked to her car without looking back. I watched her drive away, then closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. 6 months ago, Jessica and her friends had thought they were testing my love. Instead, they'd tested their own character and found it lacking. The manipulators had been outmaneuvered by their own schemes. The drama queens had been upstaged by the consequences of their own actions. And the woman who'd wanted to see if I'd fight for her had learned that sometimes the strongest response is to simply walk away. As I walked back to my kitchen to finish my coffee, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. Jessica was right about one thing. I had learned something valuable. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe them immediately. The relationship was over. I had my own place, and my future was in my hands. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities. Tonight, I'd raise a glass to understanding that the most powerful response is walking away with dignity intact. Dear listeners, that's our ending. If it resonated, subscribe to support the channel. See you next time.